Looking through the amazing list of speakers for this conference, the only name I don't recognise is my own, so it's a great privilege to be here. And thanks also to the late Neville Kennard, who was a big supporter and fan of the Property and Freedom Society and died in June this year. For a while, at the end, he was bedbound at his country property. He was quite weak and frail and surrounded with sheets and blankets. But when I came in, he sat up to see me, and the blankets fell away, and he was wearing his Rothbard Enemy of the State shirt. Nev had to cancel his attendance at last year's PFS meeting for medical reasons. So the morning after I arrived back in Australia, after last year's PFS, I drove down to his country property to tell him what he missed. He invited me for breakfast, but we had so much to talk about that I stayed for lunch and dinner, and all talking about all of you, and he was very interested. And so now that he has an even better excuse not to be here, I guess I will have to report back to him at even greater length. Also, I'm very sorry that Richard Lynn could not be here. I was very much looking forward to his speech. Now, the title of my talk is H.L. Mencken as a Libertarian Model. What makes Mencken as a libertarian model so different from other libertarian models, like Rothbard, is that Mencken had no expectation whatsoever of being influential. But this did not in any way stunt Mencken's productivity and passion as a libertarian theorist and shit-stirrer, because, to quote Mencken, quote, "An author, like any other so-called artist, is a man in whom the normal vanity of all men is so vastly exaggerated that he finds it a sheer impossibility to hold it in. Such is the thing called self-expression. The vanity of man is quite illimitable in every act of life, however trivial, and particularly in every act which pertains to his profession. He takes all the pride of a baby learning to walk. It may seem incredible, but it is nevertheless a fact that I myself get great delight out of writing such banal paragraphs as this one." End quote. So, Mencken considered politics a genre of entertainment, and he considered the corruption of politics merely as ad breaks. He thought government pathetic, obscene and criminal, but not hideous, intolerable or unsightly. As Mencken said of his libertarianism, quote, "My business is not prognosis, but diagnosis. I am not engaged in therapeutics, but in pathology. I am not, in fact, protesting against anything. I am simply describing something, not even in sorrow, but simply as a specialist in human depravity. Such spectacles do not make me indignant. They simply interest me immensely, as a pathologist, say, is interested by a beautiful gastric ulcer. It is perhaps a strange taste, that is, in a country of reformers, but there it is." End quote. So the phrase specialist in human depravity is quite brilliant, I think. I mean, think back to all the speakers we have heard over the past few days. I think it is more descriptive to call them all specialists in human depravity, rather than historians or economists or journalists or whatever. So Mencken's low expectations, I think, are much more justified than Rothbard's high expectations of future, long-term libertarian revolution or progress. In the 1965 essay, The Prospects of Liberty, in the first issue of Rothbard's journal, Left and Right, Murray Rothbard writes, quote, "While the short-run prospects for liberty at home and abroad may seem dim, the proper attitude for the libertarian to take is that of unquenchable, long-run optimism. For the libertarian, the main task of the present epoch is to cast off his needless and debilitating pessimism, to set his sights on long-run victory, and to set out on the road to its attainment." Unquote. Now, to me, this is the most cliched, romantic rubbish. It's just like saying that positive thinking helps cure cancer. In fact, it's even worse than that, because Rothbard is saying that things will get better in the long run, even though they won't in the short term. And even worse, it shows that Rothbard totally ignored the fact that Mencken's pessimism was entirely based in reason. It was not a baseless attitude. Incidentally, as an aside, all Mencken's biographers have failed to acknowledge this central fact also. However, what Rothbard said makes perfect sense if your aim in being a libertarian activist is exclusively to persuade and influence others. If persuading and influencing is your exclusive aim, then you must be optimistic that you will persuade and influence. Otherwise, you would not be a libertarian activist. But why would you be optimistic that you can persuade and influence others? Here are some common answers that many romantic libertarians use, accompanied by Menckenian responses. So romantic libertarians like to say that the internet age is different because now everyone has such easy access to libertarian propaganda. But Menckenians think that is more than cancelled out by there also being easy access to status propaganda. Romantic libertarians like to say that government intervention has become so extreme that the economic situation will result in people finally seeing the light and becoming libertarians. But Menckenians think it is more likely that hyperinflations and depressions result in increased government intervention and more misplaced blame on capitalism. Romantic libertarians like to say that slavery was abolished, even though the so-called realists said we should just regulate the slave trade. So they use this to show that we should be radical in abolishing taxes, government departments, etc., as they amount to forced labour, which is slavery. But do you know what this argument also says? It admits that actually we still have slavery. So, so the radicals did not succeed. But I still like to use that argument. I think it's a great argument. But just, in fact, in the latest edition of capitalism.hk, which is on the book table, I feature Robert Higgs using that argument. And romantic libertarians like to say that the minimum wage is a great example of economic reasoning and the best way to successfully introduce people to libertarian thought. But what the case of the minimum wage also proves is that an ever-growing number of countries all around the world are implementing and increasing the minimum wage, including Hong Kong, which has just introduced the minimum wage. So, in light of the widespread and growing popularity of so obvious a calamity as the minimum wage, how can anyone be optimistic for any libertarian progress in more complicated areas? Like, surely minimum wage reform would be the first place we'd see it if it was coming. Also, Ron Paul has attracted a huge, passionate and growing following, which is leading many people to make all sorts of romantic predictions. But if Ron Paul is so likely to succeed, how is it that someone who owes Ron Paul so much, as a son does his father, and has been subjected to more of Ron Paul's arguments than anyone else, namely his most political child, Rand Paul, is far less principled than his father and many of his supporters who have such high expectations of where the Ron Paul movement will lead? Libertarians often show, one more example of libertarian romanticism. Libertarians often show that governments of the past that are today considered to be tyrannical and unpopular, even by the establishment, share the same characteristics with popular governments today that are considered to be free and popular. With this argument, romantic libertarians hope to bring about a widespread enlightenment which will lead to a more just, free and prosperous society. But their observation also teaches something quite different, which libertarians often fail to acknowledge. As Mencken pointed out, quote, "The fact is that some of the things that men and women have desired most ardently for thousands of years are not nearer realization today than they were in the time of Ramesses, and that there is not the slightest reason for believing that they will lose their coyness on any near tomorrow. Plans for hurrying them over have been tried since the beginning. Plans for forcing them overnight are in copious and antagonistic operation today, and yet they continue to hold off and elude us, and the chances are that they will continue holding off and eluding us." To further communicate that Mencken's pessimism was justified, I think the most effective thing would be for us to see that Albert J. Nock did not believe in the remnant. Speaking to the remnant is long-term romanticism, which in a way is the most extreme form of hope-fueled romanticism. And Albert J. Nock is the author of Isaiah's Job, the most referenced essay putting forward being influential in the long term and expecting that people will find you and they will be convinced by what you say eventually. But before I quote Nock to show that he himself did not believe in the remnant, Nock's favourite author, Marcus Aurelius, offered the best criticism of those libertarian romantics, like Murray Rothbard, who believed in the remnant and are optimists for long-term libertarian progress. Quote, "They are misunderstood by their contemporaries, the people whose lives they share, but they expect to be understood by posterity, people they've never met and never will. That's what they set their hearts on. You might as well be upset at not being a hero to your great-grandfather." End quote. And Mencken made a very similar comment to Marcus Aurelius in a kind of a different context, but it'll be clear. Quote, "There is a notion that judgments of living artists are impossible. They are bound to be corrupted, we are told, by prejudice, false perspective, mob emotion, error. The question whether this or that man is great or small is one which only posterity can answer. A silly begging of the question, for doesn't posterity also make mistakes?" End quote. So because of how popular among libertarian circles the myth of Nock as optimist and reformer is, even if it's very long term, I will now read out several passages showing that Nock himself did not believe in Isaiah's job. To start with, it is worth noting that Nock himself, in the essay Isaiah's Job Itself, said, "If I were young and had the notion of embarking in the prophetical line, I would certainly take up this branch of the business, aiming at long-term influence and expecting that those who appreciate your work will eventually find you and eventually lead to progress in a libertarian direction. And therefore, I have no hesitation about recommending it as a career for anyone in that position." So anyone who's young and prophetical. But Nock was not young when he wrote it, and he was not interested in embarking on a career in the prophetical line. So when people talk of Nock's remnant, they do not talk of a remnant that Nock wrote intentionally for. So here are some more passages showing that Nock was thoroughly pessimistic about the prospects for liberty. Quote, "The only thing that the psychically human being can do to improve society is to present society with one improved unit. Very few among mankind have either the force of intellect to manage this method intelligently or the force of character to apply it constantly. Hence, if one regards mankind as being what they are, the chances seem to be that the deceptively easier way will continue to prevail among them throughout an indefinitely long future. It is easy to prescribe improvement for others. It is easy to organise something, to institutionalise this or that, to pass laws, multiply bureaucratic agencies, form pressure groups, start revolutions, change forms of government, tinker at political theory. The fact that these expedients have been tried unsuccessfully in every conceivable combination for 6,000 years has not noticeably impaired a credulous, unintelligent willingness to keep on trying them again and again. This being so, it seems highly probable that the hope for any significant improvement of society must be postponed." End quote. Here's another Nock paragraph. Quote, "If it were in my power to pull down its whole structure overnight and set up another of my own devising, to abolish the state out of hand and replace it by an organisation of the economic means, I would not do it, for the minds of Americans are far from fitted to any such great change as this." End quote. Here's another Nock paragraph. Quote, "Taking the sum of the state's physical strength with the force of powerful spiritual influences behind it, one asks, what can be done against the state's progress in self-aggrandizement? Simply nothing. So far from encouraging any hopeful contemplation of the unattainable, the student of civilized man will offer no conclusion but that nothing can be done." End quote. And another, quote, "Even a successful revolution, if such a thing were conceivable, against the military tyranny which is statism's last expedient, would accomplish nothing. The people would be as thoroughly indoctrinated with statism after the revolution as they were before, and therefore the revolution would be no revolution but a coup d'etat, by which the citizen would gain nothing but a mere change of oppressors. There have been many revolutions in the last 25 years, and this has been the sum of their history. They amount to no more than an impressive testimony to the great truth that there can be no right action except there be right thinking behind it. As long as the easy, attractive, superficial philosophy of statism remains in control of the citizen's mind, no beneficent social change can be effected, whether by revolution or by any other means." End quote. And one last one. Quote, "Sometimes people who knew my politics have wondered that I do not crusade for it or even say much about it. But much more than a sound economic system is necessary. You have to have sound people to work it. The wise social philosophers were those who merely hung up their ideas and left them hanging." for men to look at or pass by as they chose. Jesus and Socrates did not even trouble to write theirs out, and Marcus Aurelius spoke his only in crabbed memoranda for his own use, never thinking anyone else would see them." End quote. So this passage mentions Marcus Aurelius, whom we quoted earlier, and Nock was Nock often said it's his favourite author. So here's another Marcus Aurelius passage. Quote, "Evil, the same old thing. Whatever happens, keep this in mind. It's the same old thing, from one end of the world to the other. It fills the history books, ancient and modern, and the cities and the houses too, familiar, transient. Look at the past, empire succeeding empire, and from that extrapolate the future, the same thing. No escape from the rhythm of events, which is why observing life for 40 years is as good as 1,000. Would you really see anything new?" End quote. So that Nock, like Mencken, enjoyed the spectacle and was not disappointed by it. Here is one more Nock passage. Quote, "The war was detestable enough, but the anthropoid job holders who engineered it and the masses whom they coerced and exploited were doing the best that the limitations of their nature admitted of their doing, and one could expect no more than that. There was even a certain grave beauty, such as one observes in a battle of snakes or sharks, in the machinations which they contrived in order to fulfill the law of their being. One regarded these creatures with abhorrence, yes, sometimes with boredom and annoyance, yes, but with despondency and disappointment, no. So yes, sometimes, as Nock said, politics fills Menckenians with boredom, but there aren't many forms of entertainment that don't have occasional slow patches and off days. But really, I think everyone here can find enough enjoyment in being a libertarian theorist and shit stirrer without needing to think that they are helping people and being influential. I don't think I need to tell anyone here how amusing government is. I mean, government does not tax our enjoyment, it subsidises it. Did Jeffrey Tucker look miserable in his speech earlier today when he was describing how tough government makes his life? As the title of his speech seemed to hint. Have any of the PFS speakers appeared sad about government? I don't think so. Everyone here appears to enjoy the absurdity of government and to enjoy speaking against it. But I understand that many people here need to believe that they can make a difference by influencing others. And of course, being a Menckenian, I don't expect to change your minds. So to offer you people something from this talk, I recommend that you learn all you can about the Western Australian mining magnate, Gina Rinehart. Being the richest woman in the world, she is getting increasing international media attention, and many news reports predict her becoming the richest person in the world in the not-too-distant future. She is now an even bigger prospect for bringing on the libertarian revolution than Ron Paul. I discovered an interview in an Australian women's magazine in 1975 where she said that she listed her occupation on her passport as secessionist. Her father was not afraid to call Australia's political parties, public servants, industry groups, university students and journalists all a bunch of socialists. And Mrs. Rinehart is definitely a big fan of her father's politics. Moreover, she is spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to get media influence, although none of that's come to me. So I hope all you optimists out there feel that you've got something out of this talk. In conclusion, Menckenians might hope that libertarian progress will be made, even if that will unfortunately compromise our gargantuan enjoyment watching the greedy and gullible passionately support people who will betray them in our gloriously corrupt and unprincipled commonwealth of morons, for a Mencken phrase. So we can hope, Menckenians can hope for libertarian progress, but we don't expect any progress. But to repeat, that does not mean that there are not many other reasons for being a libertarian theorist and shit stirrer. And one of the best of those reasons would be to enjoy yourself at Hoppe's Property and Freedom Society. Thank you.